So you want a GSX-R 750. That means you've arrived at one of the strangest anomalies of the 2026 motorcycle market, because by all accounts, this motorcycle should have been discontinued a long time ago. I mean, come on, the Gixxer 750 outlasted the R6? The 750 racing class in AMA Superbike ended in 2002. That was 24 years ago, probably longer than some of you have been alive. Yet Suzuki, in typical Suzuki fashion, is still happy to sell you one of these motorcycles brand new at the dealership, even though it has not been changed since 2011. But somehow, despite all of this, the Suzuki Gixxer 750 is almost relevant again. By continuing to produce a motorcycle that had by most metrics fallen completely out of fashion, it has almost come back in style. 600cc Supersports are now old news, with the new next generation Supersports gravitating towards larger displacement twins and triples. So now, a 750cc sport bike making around 130 something horsepower doesn't feel like an awkward in between. It feels like it's meeting the moment, and for a lot of people, surpassing the moment, because it's so analog and it's kind of cool. So while the concept of the Gixxer 750 has accidentally aged pretty well, the motorcycle itself feels very dated by comparison to other bikes. So it does beg the question, is the Gixxer 750 an heirloom masterpiece, or is it just an overpriced relic, or is it a confusing combination of the two? Let's get into it. All right, hold your horses. Before you start trying on camo cargo shorts in the Old Navy dressing room or trying to figure out why Suzuki's website has not been updated since the Obama administration, we need to first talk about what the Gixxer 750 actually is. Because if you're a younger rider, there's a good chance you don't even know why Suzuki sells a 750cc sport bike in the first place, when literally nobody else is doing this. Okay, so back in the 80s, the Gixxer 750 was the sport bike, the one that pioneered the modern race replica motorcycle. The Gixxer 1000 is actually built upon the 750 platform, not the other way around as you might suspect. Then as time went on, the 750 racing class disappeared and 1000cc liter bikes became the gold standard. And as other manufacturers moved on, Suzuki held on to their precious 750. And it developed a bit of a cult following during the sport bike craze of the early aughts. Because in a certain sense, if you must ride a sport bike on the street, if you're truly about that life, the 750 did offer a unique balance. It had more torque than a wimpy 600, but it was lighter and more agile than a liter bike, while just missing the last 50 horsepower or so, which, let's be honest, you're not even really going to use on road. So it's a bit of a Goldilocks bike. The Gixxer 750 is a sport bike that makes some sacrifices to be more usable for the street. Does that sound a little familiar? Today's next generation Supersports are kind of spiritually similar in a way. Compared to the last generation inline 4.600s that needed to be revved all the way to the moon to make power, the new bikes that range from like 8 to 900 cc's sacrifice top-end power for the sake of torque and usability. They're sport bikes that someone could much more easily ride on the street in between their once every few months track days, if they're lucky to do that. In this sense, the Gixxer 750 has found itself almost relevant again. Almost being the key word here, because while the displacement might look approximate to the modern competitors, it's still a very far cry from being modern itself. But for some, that might actually be a selling point. The mighty 750 saw its last meaningful mechanical update in 2011. 15 years later, that's practically vintage. It still uses a cable throttle. It does not make use of any ride modes, traction control, or ABS. It really is as close to a Y2K era sport bike that you can buy brand new today, which is kind of cool. Without any significant updates or changes, Suzuki is able to grandfather these bikes into each model year without having to meet the stricter guidelines that bikes must adhere to today. That's why you don't see these bikes being sold in Europe anymore. Not only does it not meet Euro 5+, it couldn't even meet Euro 4. And the cost to update and modernize what is essentially an enthusiast heritage model for a very niche market can't be justified. But here in the States, the humble Gixxer 750 is just plugging along. A couple of units rolling off the assembly line each year. I would really love to know the annual sales figures for this bike brand new, because it is just so enigmatic. Suzuki and the rest of the Big Four keep telling us inline 4 sport bikes just are not selling these days, yet the terminally online Suzuki stands seem to think that the Gixxer 750 is God's gift to motorcycling. So while the idea of the Gixxer 750 feels somewhat relevant again, its execution is still incredibly dated. And regardless of whether a raw and analog sport bike experience is what you desire, there's really no way you can justify paying over $13,000 for one brand new. So in that case, you must look in the back catalog. If buying a brand new Gixxer 750 makes as much sense as financing a fax machine, what year should you buy if you're actually serious about the Gixxer Squid life? The short answer is pretty simple: any 2011 plus unit that's been decently cared for. And that's one of the benefits of these long-in-the-tooth Suzuki models. Since they don't update them that frequently, there's plenty of used options to choose from that aren't really that different from a brand new one. So 2011 plus is the short answer. But the long answer is a little more interesting. The Gixxer 750 established the modern sport bike archetype and is responsible for many milestones in the category over the decades. When it was first released, it used many of the components that we'd expect to find on a sport bike today. It had an aluminum twin spar frame, race replica fairings, aggressive ergonomics, and lightweight construction. By the late 90s and early 2000s, the Gixxer 750 had become a defining motorcycle of the sport bike boom. Back when sport bikes were a cultural landmark, the 750 was the figurehead of the movement. But if we're talking about what bike to actually buy today, all roads lead back to a 2011 plus. This was the last major overhaul: new chassis, revised engine, weight reduction, updated styling, and of course, bold new graphics, baby. This is fundamentally the bike that Suzuki is still building today. The bikes that came pre-2011 are cool and historically significant, but they're either a museum piece or some molested trailer park project bike. Gixxers live hard lives across the board, and the 750 is in no way immune to that. As an example, I found this 2006 Gixxer 750 on CycleTrader for $3,200. Runs good, just needs a body kit and brakes. Nope, run away. On the other hand, we have this 2017 for $9,900 that, despite the 23,000 miles on the clock, looks pretty factory fresh. But it's also kind of crazy that it hasn't depreciated that much. Maybe the seller wants a little too much for it. Or there are plenty of bikes just a few years old in the $10,000 to $12,000 range. As far as mileage goes, you don't really need to be all too concerned about it. Gixxers are pretty bulletproof as long as they're not crashed headfirst into a brick wall. But remember, in regard to pricing, your results may vary depending on where you live and how many super squids you've got driving the market price up. But here's the thing: if you're going to spend $12,000, $13,000, or even $14,000 on a motorcycle that is essentially from 2011, well, that's kind of a hard pill to swallow.
There are a lot of content creators that are obsessed with gear. $3,000 camera bodies, $2,000 lens, boom mics, rack lighting. It's all a little overkill if you ask me. If you're making motorcycle content online, there's really no reason to overcomplicate it. You want to spend less time scouring forums to figure out the perfect frame rate settings and more time just getting out, filming, and making stuff. That's the #1 rule of making content. Get out there and just do it. Get started. That's why we love working with DJI. Their cameras allow you to just make awesome content right out of the box with no guesswork. Action 6 for the helmet, Mic Mini for audio, and then an Osmo 360 on your tail section. 360 cameras have completely changed the game for motorcycle content and on-the-bike reviews. No need to hire an intern to film rollers from a follow car. You don't need to beg your buddy Braden to park his CF Moto so he can film your flybys from his iPhone. The Osmo 360 allows you to DIY super cinematic and dynamic riding footage to complement your POV vlogs. It films in 360 degrees and allows you to choose your desired angles during post-production. So you don't need to worry about nailing the shot like some sort of neurotic film student. With the Osmo 360 recording on your bike, you can be sure that if something crazy went down, you caught it on video. If you want to level up your motorcycle content, check out the DJI Osmo 360 in the link below. It's become a non-negotiable piece of gear for video production here at Yami Noob. Thanks to DJI for supporting the channel. Now let's get back to the show.
Let's think about what other bikes may serve a similar purpose, but perhaps would be a better use of the money. The strange thing about shopping for a Gixxer 750 in 2026 is that there really isn't another motorcycle exactly like it on the market. It has no direct competitors. Maybe that's part of the appeal. Or maybe that's indicative of the fact that everyone else has moved on to greener pastures. The most obvious comparison in many ways is the R9. The R9 is kind of the future of Japanese supersports. It uses the 890cc triple from the MT-09 that makes 117 horsepower and 69 foot-pounds of torque. It's modern in ways that the Gixxer just can't even imagine, with the TFT dash, IMU-based electronics, ride modes, traction control, all the good stuff. It might not be a bleeding-edge race bike out of the box, but despite what many forum dweller Supersport guys might say, the R9 is actually pretty well suited for how most people actually use their sport bikes. The spread of torque is far more usable on the street. It makes power all the way through the rev range in a very linear way. It's comfortable enough to ride on the street, and in the right hands with a few tweaks, it can do some serious damage on track. The R9 costs less than the Gixxer 2 at $12,499, which is kind of crazy to say. It's objectively a smarter decision, but if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Y2K street squid that wants an unadulterated analog bike from a bygone era, the R9 might be a little too smart for you. Then there is the Kawasaki ZX-6R. Sure, this is just a 636cc engine making 127 horsepower, but it's probably the closest thing to a traditional Supersport that's still being sold in a modern and updated form. Like the Gixxer, it retains the screaming inline 4 that seems to be a non-negotiable for many. And as more and more disappear from the segment, the ones that stick around do start to feel a little special. Unlike the Gixxer, the ZX-6R has been brought into the modern era. It has a quick shifter, ride modes, and a TFT display and ABS. It's still down on cubes comparably, so it's going to take a little bit more revving to really wake the engine up at low speeds. The bigger engine in the Gixxer 750 did really solve the minimal torque problem that plagued the 600 class. Although the ZX6 with its extra 36 cc's is really not that bad. If the 750 had updates like the 636, we probably wouldn't even need to make this comparison. The choice would be pretty clear. But if you need the true inline 4 sport bike, you're going to have to choose what's more important to you. A smaller bike that's really modern, or a bigger bike that's 15 years out of touch. The Triumph Street Triple RS is kind of an oddball comparison, but hear me out. Yes, it's not a fully fared sport bike, nor is it a 4-cylinder, but the Street Triple really has more in common with old school homologated Supersports than it does with something like the R9. It has an inline triple that makes around 128 horsepower, and this engine really is quite racy. It redlines at 12,650 RPM, where an R9 redlines at just over 10,000. And it is race-derived and race-proven, which is pretty cool, being the engine supplier for Moto 2. It has awesome suspension, Brembo brakes, and modern electronics. And it has real racing chops. It competes in World Supersport as well as being the engine for the Moto 2 platform, like I said. The Street Triple has continuously evolved and been iterated on for years and years, whereas the 750 was plucked from an AMA racing event 25 years ago and then not really touched. The Triumph is objectively better in every way than a Gixxer 750, but it doesn't have a 4-cylinder or fairings, and something tells me that the person shopping for a Gixxer 750 needs those things. Nearly every competitor to the Gixxer 750 is completely modern. They're more sophisticated and cheaper too. When all the competition is objectively better, Suzuki's advantage becomes just nostalgia and purity. The novelty that comes from being the only raw, old-school analog sport bike you can still get today. And for most people, that uniqueness is not enough of a reason to buy a Gixxer 750, but for others, it seems to be the perfect reason. So who exactly is this motorcycle for? Honestly, it's really not for that many people. I mean, this is a sharp race-derived product that hasn't seen updates in 15 years. If you're looking for the best value, an R9 is probably a better deal. If you want more technology, look in any direction away from a Suzuki dealership. If you're looking for the fastest motorcycle you can get, there will be plenty of places that will let you finance a leader bike with an 18% loan. The Gixxer 750 is for someone who longs for an era of sport bikes that largely doesn't exist anymore. It's kind of a romantic purchase. They want a bike that feels mechanical and direct. It's for someone who wants to be connected to their bike without any digital whiz-bang techno babysitters. I don't want a frickin' iPad on my motorcycle. It's for riders who still believe, despite ample evidence to the contrary, that the inline 4 is the only correct motorcycle engine configuration, all while wanting a little bit more power than a 600 and more agility than a 1000. And I'll reiterate, that is a very unique individual, and it's probably why they don't sell that many of them. It's for someone who realizes that motorcycles are emotional purchases as much as they are rational ones. And as a guy who owns a dumb, analog, old-school, air-cooled bike, I kind of get it. The 750 delivers an experience that feels pretty rare in 2026 and is kind of a breath of fresh air. An inline-4 engine, a proven chassis, enough power to get you into trouble if you don't know what you're doing, and no rider aids to save you. I like it. It's kind of dangerous. That's why the Gixxer 750 fan base is so devoted. It's raw, simple, Everything you need and nothing you don't. If it didn't cost $13,500, I'd probably be more of an advocate. But as someone who thinks people should get a little bit more for their dollar when it comes to bikes, especially in our current economy, it's a hard machine to recommend. But alas, the diehard Suzuki fans out there care little what the blue-pilled Yamaha simp Yami Noob has to say. So if you want a Gixxer 750, you're probably just gonna go get one anyways. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. I hope it provided you some value. What do you guys think? Is the Gixxer 750 an important inclusion in the modern market, despite its clear drawbacks? Or should Suzuki finally just get with the program? I've said it for years, but I think Suzuki's kind of god-tier move here would be take the Gixxer 750, update it just enough to make it modern to compete in this new next-generation Supersport category, and just price it under 13 grand. Mop up shop. Done deal. Let me know in the comments down below if you own a Gixxer 750, and if so, how many times have you been arrested? Thanks again for watching. I will catch you guys in the next one.